The orientation hall of the Galactic Naval Academy stretched 300 meters in every direction, its ceiling lost somewhere in the artificial atmosphere above. Cadet Joanna Reeves stood in formation with 200 other first years, her head barely reaching the chest plates of the Kraven warriors flanking her. At 1.5 meters tall and 50 kilograms soaking wet, she was used to being the smallest person in any room on Earth. Here, surrounded by species that had evolved on high-gravity worlds, low-oxygen planets, and everything in between, she looked like someone's child who'd wandered into the wrong building. The Kraven to her left, a mountain of rust-colored chitin and corded muscle named Throx, glanced down at her with his cluster of black eyes. His mandibles clicked in what she'd learned was their equivalent of a dismissive snort. "Human," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "You are certain you are in the correct program? The medical track is in the Eastern Complex." Joanna kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, despite the ache already building in her lower back. The gravity here was set to standard, 1.2 times Earth normal, a compromise between the various species' needs. For her, it meant every movement required 15% more effort than she'd trained for her entire life. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Cadet Throx." His mandibles clicked again, faster this time. Amusement, maybe, or pity. Hard to tell with the Kraven. On her right, a Veleshi female, all flowing limbs and bioluminescent patterns beneath translucent skin, tilted her elongated head toward Joanna. The Veleshi were beautiful in an unsettling way, like watching something both liquid and solid at once. "The human is brave," the Veleshi whispered, her voice like wind through crystal. "Or foolish. The survival rate for your species in combat training is 32%. Lower than any other admitted race. I know the statistics." Joanna's jaw tightened. She'd memorized every damn number before she'd even applied. Humans had been part of the Galactic Coalition for only 30 years, barely a blink in the timeline of species like the Kraven, who'd been starfaring for millennia. In that time, exactly 214 humans had attempted the Naval Academy's combat track. 68 had graduated. The rest had washed out, broken, or in 3 cases, died during training exercises that other species completed with minor injuries. The orientation officer, a towering Draken whose scales shimmered between blue and violet, stepped onto the raised platform at the hall's center. His voice boomed without amplification, resonating in frequencies that made Joanna's teeth ache. "Cadets, you stand here because your worlds have deemed you worthy, because your genetics, your training, your psychology have been analyzed and found acceptable." His serpentine eyes swept across the formation, pupils contracting to slits. 60% of you will not complete the first year. Of those who remain, half will not survive to graduation. This is not a school. This is a forge. We do not create officers here. We reveal them. Joanna felt the weight of those words settle into her bones, joining the constant pull of the heavier gravity. Around her, cadets from a dozen different worlds stood taller, straighter, their various physiologies responding to the challenge. She did the same, even though it made her calves scream and her shoulders burn. The Draken continued. "Your first evaluation begins in 6 hours. You will be sorted into training pods of 8. These will be your brothers, your sisters, your rivals, and your mirrors for the next year. If you are weak, they will know. If you are false, they will see. If you are unworthy—" He paused, letting the silence stretch. "They will tell us." Dismissed, the formation broke apart into clusters of nervous conversation. Joanna started toward the exit, planning to find the dormitory and maybe figure out how to adjust her bunk for the gravity difference, when a hand, more like a claw really, gripped her shoulder. She turned to find Throx looming over her, his bulk blocking out the light from the nearest solar panel. Up close, she could see the scars cross-hatching his carapace, the way his mandibles were slightly asymmetrical, as if one had been broken and healed wrong. Human Reeves. He didn't release her shoulder. I will be direct, as is the way of my people. You should withdraw now. The first evaluation is a gravity endurance test. You will fail. Worse, your failure will impact the performance scores of whatever pod you are assigned to. You will be a burden. Joanna looked up at him, at the four eyes studying her with what might have been genuine concern or might have been calculation. She'd read about the Kraven, a warrior culture that valued strength above all else, but also honored honesty. He wasn't being cruel. He was being practical. I appreciate the warning, she said carefully, but I'm not withdrawing. Then you are foolish. Maybe. She shrugged out from under his grip. He let her go easily, which somehow stung more than if he'd held on. But I didn't come 9 light years to quit before the first test. She walked away before he could respond, weaving through the crowd of cadets who towered over her like a forest of dangerous, alien trees. Behind her, she heard the Veleshi female's crystalline laugh, followed by Throx's rumbling response in his own language. She didn't need a translator to know they were discussing the fragile little human who thought she belonged among warriors. The dormitory was a nightmare of logistics. Bunks designed for beings 2 to 3 times her size, sanitation facilities that required step stools she'd have to fabricate herself, and a gravity setting that made even climbing into bed an exercise in determination. By the time she'd managed to secure her few belongings, a photo of her parents, a battered copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War, and the bronze medal she'd won at the Pan American Combat Championships when she was 16, she was sweating and shaking. She sat on the edge of her bunk, legs dangling a full meter off the floor, and pulled up her datapad. The first evaluation, gravity endurance. Cadets would be placed in progressively intensifying gravity fields while performing a series of physical tasks. The test ended when you either completed all tasks or collapsed. Most species trained on worlds with higher gravity than standard, meaning their bodies were already adapted. Humans, coming from a 1G world, were at an immediate disadvantage. Joanna closed her eyes and felt the pull of the station's artificial gravity, the way it wanted to drag her down, compress her spine, squeeze the air from her lungs. She'd spent the last 6 months in Earth's gravity training facilities, working up to 1.5 Gs, pushing herself until blood vessels burst in her eyes and her bones felt like they were splintering. It hadn't been enough. She knew that. The test tomorrow would go higher, 2 Gs, maybe 2.5, levels where a human body started to fail in fundamental ways, where the heart struggled to push blood upward against the relentless pull, where consciousness became negotiable. But she'd known this before she'd applied, had known it when she'd stood in the recruitment office on Luna Station, staring at the holographic display of the Academy while the Veleshi recruiter, not unkindly, explained that humans were not physically suited for frontline combat roles in the Galactic Navy, that their species' contributions were better utilized in support, logistics, medical, and diplomatic capacities. She'd thanked him for his honesty and applied anyway. Now, sitting in a bunk too large for her body on a station where she was objectively the weakest cadet in her class, Joanna allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of doubt. 30 seconds to wonder if Throx was right, if the recruiter had been right, if she was about to humiliate herself and possibly get seriously hurt for the sake of stubborn pride. Then the 30 seconds were up, and she got to work. The station's training facilities were accessible to cadets outside of mandatory hours, and Joanna spent the remaining time before the evaluation there, subjecting herself to the gravity chambers in progressive intervals. 1.5 Gs for 10 minutes, rest. 1.8 Gs for 5 minutes, rest. She didn't try to reach the levels she'd face tomorrow. That would only exhaust her. Instead, she focused on technique, on moving efficiently, on remembering the lessons from every combat instructor who'd ever told her that leverage and timing could defeat raw strength. She wasn't alone. Other cadets filtered through the facility, most of them running drills in the standard gravity areas, a few experimenting with reduced gravity environments. She caught sight of Throks in one of the heavy G chambers, moving through combat forms in 2.8 Gs like it was nothing, his massive body flowing with surprising grace. He saw her watching and paused, mandibles spreading in what might have been challenge or curiosity. She waved once, then returned to her own chamber, where 1.8 Gs was making her vision sparkle at the edges. The evaluation hall was different from the orientation space. Smaller, more utilitarian, with walls of dark metal and a floor marked with geometric patterns that Joanna suspected were sensor arrays. The 200 cadets had been divided into 25 groups of 8, each group clustered around a designated station. Joanna found herself in Pod 17, and the moment she saw her teammates, her heart sank. Throks. Of course. The massive Kraven stood with his arms crossed over his chest plate, looking like a statue carved from rust-colored stone. Beside him, the Valeshi female from orientation, her name turned out to be Silvestri, rippled with faint colors beneath her skin, patterns Joanna was learning to read as emotional states. Right now, skepticism mixed with curiosity. The other 5 were new faces, 2 Riken twins, amphibious beings with mottled green skin and too many joints in their limbs, who moved in perfect synchronization. A Hresh, which looked like someone had taken a bear, added extra arms, and covered it in overlapping scales. A Quinn, insectoid and precise, its compound eyes reflecting everything in fragmented kaleidoscope. And finally, another human, male, early 20s, built like he'd grown up in a heavy G gym. He had the look of Earth military, short hair, scarred knuckles, a jaw that might have been carved from granite. When he saw Joanna, his expression flickered through surprise, concern, and something that might have been pity. Joanna Reeves, she introduced herself to the group, keeping her voice level. Thomas Wright, the other human said. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Look, I don't know your background, but this first test is... I know what it is. Do you? He glanced at the rest of the pod, then back to her. Because I trained for 2 years at the Mars facility in 1.8 Gs, and I'm still not sure I can handle what they're going to throw at us. You're what, 50 kilos? 60 at most? 52. He winced. That's insufficient, Throks rumbled, joining their conversation uninvited. Cadet Wright is attempting diplomacy, but I will speak truth. Human Reeves, your presence will lower our pod's performance rating. When you fail, and you will fail, it will be recorded against all of us. I request you withdraw now and save us the burden. The other pod members were watching now, even the Riken twins pausing their synchronized stretching to observe. Joanna felt heat crawl up her neck, that familiar cocktail of anger and embarrassment that had fueled her through every dismissal, every time someone had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. Request denied, she said quietly. Throks's mandibles clicked, definitely annoyance this time. This is not pride worth dying for. Who said anything about dying? Joanna met his clustered eyes without flinching. I'm going to pass the test. You worry about your own performance. Before he could respond, the lights in the hall dimmed and a holographic display materialized above each pod station. Their proctor appeared, a Draken similar to the orientation officer, but smaller, female, with scales that shaded from deep purple to silver. Pod 17, she said, her voice resonating in that uncomfortable frequency range. I am Proctor Vesh. I will be evaluating your performance today and throughout your first cycle training. The gravity endurance test is designed to assess not only physical capability, but also mental resilience and tactical awareness under stress. The floor beneath their station shimmered, and Joanna felt the change immediately, a gentle increase in gravity, just enough to make her knees want to buckle. Around her, the other cadets adjusted their stances. Throks looked completely unbothered. Thomas grimaced, but held steady. The test consists of 5 stages, Vesh continued. Each stage increases gravity by 0.3 standard units and introduces a physical challenge. You will be evaluated individually, but your pod's collective performance determines your ranking against other pods. There are no time limits, but failure to complete a stage within reasonable parameters will result in individual disqualification. The holographic display shifted, showing a schematic of the course ahead. Joanna studied it quickly. Obstacles, climbing walls, balance beams, all things that would become exponentially harder as gravity increased. Current gravity, 1.5 standard, Vesh announced. Stage 1 begins now. The floor lit up with pathways leading to different obstacles. Joanna moved immediately, not giving herself time to think about the extra weight pressing down on her joints. The first challenge was simple, a series of platforms requiring jumps of increasing distance. At Earth gravity, she could have cleared them without thought. Here, each jump felt like launching herself through mud. She landed the first one hard, absorbing the impact through her legs, the way her instructors had drilled into her thousands of times. The second jump was longer. She had to run to build momentum, every step sluggish. Around her, other cadets were moving through their own obstacles, Throks ascending a vertical wall using only his lower arms, the Riken twins navigating some kind of suspended rope course with their extra joints giving them impossible flexibility. Thomas was on the platforms near her, and she could see him struggling with the same physics she was fighting. But his extra 40 kilos of muscle meant each jump cost him more effort. By the third platform, he was breathing hard. Joanna cleared the fourth platform and glanced back. Thomas had fallen behind, and the look on his face said he was considering stopping, regrouping, conserving energy. "Come on," she called to him. "Don't think about it. Just move." He looked surprised that she was talking to him, then nodded and pushed forward. She finished the platform course and moved to the next obstacle, a balance beam suspended 3 meters off the ground, barely 20 centimeters wide. In standard gravity, this was a mental challenge more than a physical one. In enhanced gravity, it became both. One slip, and the fall would hurt in ways her bones remembered from training. Joanna stepped onto the beam. The world narrowed to the sensation of her feet against metal, the way her center of gravity wanted to drag her sideways. She'd done this before, thousands of times, in dojos from Seattle to Tokyo. Balance wasn't about strength, it was about finding the quiet place inside where motion and stillness met. She walked the beam like she was walking a path through her own mind, each step deliberate, each breath measured. Behind her, she heard someone fall, a heavy crash followed by the Hresha's growling curse. She didn't turn to look, couldn't afford the distraction. The beam ended at a ladder leading down. She descended carefully, feeling the ladder vibrate as Thomas climbed onto the beam above. He was moving slowly, cautiously, and she willed him forward with silent encouragement. Stage 1 complete, Vesh's voice echoed, gravity increasing to 1.8 standard. Joanna's knees nearly buckled as the additional weight slammed down. Around the hall, she heard grunts of effort, saw cadets adjusting their stances. One of the Riken twins stumbled and went down hard, staying down. 78% of Earth gravity added to her frame. Joanna did the math automatically, 40 additional kilograms of force distributed across her skeleton and muscles. Her heart rate was climbing, vision starting to tunnel slightly at the edges. She moved to stage 2 before her body could start negotiating with her mind. This stage was worse. A climbing wall at a 60-degree angle, holds spaced for beings with longer reach than hers. She studied it for 3 seconds, mapping a route that would work for her arm length, then started climbing. Every pull-up was an act of will. Her fingers screamed around the holds, shoulders burning with the effort of hauling her body weight plus 78% against the relentless pull. Halfway up, her right hand slipped, and for a heart-stopping moment, she hung by one arm, feet scrabbling for purchase. Then she found it. A hold she'd missed before, slightly off the optimal path but workable. She adjusted her route and kept climbing. At the top, she pulled herself over the edge and lay flat for exactly 5 seconds, letting her lungs remember how to process oxygen. Then she stood and moved to the next challenge. Stage 3 began at 2.1 standard gravities, and this was where Joanna's preparation met its limit. The moment the increase hit, her vision grayed at the edges, and she felt her knees start to buckle. She caught herself on a nearby railing, there for safety, but using it counted against performance scores, and held on until the world stabilized. Around the hall, cadets were dropping. She saw the second Rickon twin collapse, both of them now out of the competition. The Hresh was on hands and knees, breathing in great gasping wheezes. Even Throks had slowed, his movements more deliberate, though he still looked like he could go several stages higher without serious trouble. Thomas was still in it, barely. She could see him across the course, moving through what looked like a series of weighted carries, sandbags that probably massed 20 kilos in standard gravity, but felt like 50 here. His face was the color of old meat, veins standing out on his temples, but he was still moving. Silvestri, the Valeshi, was the surprise. Her species came from a low-gravity world, and Joanna had expected her to fold early. Instead, she seemed to be using some kind of technique Joanna didn't understand, her body moving in ways that didn't quite follow standard physics, as if she was finding pockets of lesser gravity that shouldn't exist. Stage 3's challenge for Joanna was a sprint course, 30 meters of straight running through increasingly heavy resistance fields. At 2.1 Gs, running felt like trying to move underwater while wearing lead weights. Each step was a negotiation between forward momentum and total collapse. She made it 15 meters before her legs gave out. Joanna went down hard, knees cracking against the floor, hands catching her at the last second before her face met metal. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, and for a moment she just stayed there, breathing in gasps that didn't seem to bring enough oxygen, heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. This was it, the moment everyone had predicted, the fragile little human hitting her limit. She could see Vesh watching from her platform, data streaming across the holographic display beside her, could see Throks in peripheral vision, moving through his own challenge with grim determination, could see Thomas still carrying his impossibly heavy sandbags, step by agonizing step. 30 seconds passed, then another 30. The gravity didn't care about her problems, it just kept pulling, relentless and impartial. Joanna closed her eyes. There was a thing her first martial arts instructor had taught her when she was 8 years old and angry at being the smallest kid in the dojo. He'd been an old Korean man who'd survived things he never talked about, and he'd knelt down to her level and said, "Small is not weak. Small is concentrated. Same power, smaller space. Understand?" She hadn't understood then, spent years not understanding, trying to compensate for size with aggression, with flashy techniques, with anything that would make her look bigger than she was. Understanding came later, in 1,000 moments of almost failure, came in the realization that leverage didn't care about mass, that timing could defeat strength, that efficiency was its own form of power, that gravity, for all its crushing weight, was just force applied across distance, and force could be redirected. Joanna opened her eyes. She'd been fighting the gravity, trying to overpower it with muscle and determination. Wrong approach. Gravity wasn't an opponent, it was a condition. You didn't beat it, you moved through it. She shifted her position, letting her body's center drop lower, weight distributed across a wider base. From this position, close to the ground, the gravity had less leverage. She wasn't trying to stand tall against it. She was accepting its presence and working within it. She started moving again, not running. She didn't have the strength for that anymore. Instead, she moved in a low crouch that would have looked ridiculous in Earth gravity, but here, now, was the most efficient path forward. Each step was shorter, more controlled. She wasn't fighting her way through the resistance field. She was finding the path of least resistance, the spaces between the poles where movement was possible. 16 meters, 17, 18. Her thighs were on fire, quadriceps screaming their protest. The tunnel vision was back, world shrinking to just the floor ahead and the next step. She could hear her heart in her ears, a drum that was beating too fast, too hard. 20 meters, 21. Something in her left knee popped. Not a catastrophic failure, but a warning. She kept moving, adjusted her weight to favor the right leg, kept moving. 25 meters. The resistance field intensified, like moving through increasingly thick syrup. She'd read about this part. The final approach was deliberately designed to be exponentially harder, to break the will as much as the body. Joanna thought about her parents watching her launch toward the academy, her mother crying even though she was trying not to, her father with that expression of pride and terror that said he understood exactly what his daughter was attempting. Thought about every coach who'd told her she had potential if she'd just accept her limitations. Thought about the Valeshi recruiter's kind, pitying eyes as he explained why humans weren't suited for combat. 28 meters. Her vision was going properly dark now, consciousness starting to negotiate its own terms. She could feel her body preparing to shut down, to protect itself from the damage she was demanding. 29 meters. Time stretched. Each step was an eternity. She couldn't feel her legs anymore. They'd become abstract concepts she was moving through sheer bloody-mindedness. 30 meters. She crossed the line and collapsed immediately, going down like someone had cut her strings. The world was gray static and the sound of her own gasping breaths. Somewhere far away, she heard an alert chime, challenge complete, but it seemed unimportant compared to the immediate problem of convincing her lungs to keep working. Hands grabbed her, careful but firm, and lifted her to a recovery area off the main course. She was dimly aware of being placed on some kind of medical platform, of scanners sweeping across her body. Vitals are concerning but stable. Microfractures in the left tibia and both fibulae. Cardiac stress within acceptable parameters. The voices were clinical, detached, discussing her body like it was an interesting mechanical problem. Maybe it was. Joanna forced her eyes open and found herself looking up at a medical drone, its sensors blinking as it catalogued her various failures. Beside it, Proctor Vesh stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Cadet Reeves," Vesh said, her voice pitched to a frequency that didn't make Joanna's teeth ache for once. "You completed Stage 3. You did so with the slowest time of any cadet still active, and you utilized a locomotion method that, while effective, was—" She paused, searching for a word. "Unconventional. Did I pass?" Joanna's voice came out as a croak. "You completed the stage. That is the only requirement for passing." Vesh tilted her head, studying Joanna with those alien eyes. "You have been cleared for Stage 4, though medical recommends a 10-minute recovery period. Do you wish to continue?" Joanna tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Everything hurt, not the sharp pain of acute injury, but the deep, systemic ache of a body pushed beyond its design specifications. The medical drone made a disapproving beep and extended a manipulator arm to keep her prone. "How many are still active?" she asked instead. "Of your pod? 4. Cadet Throaks, Cadet Silvestri, Cadet Wright, and yourself. Of the full cohort, 68 cadets remain." Joanna did the math. They'd started with 200. Less than a third were still going, and Thomas was still in it. That gave her more satisfaction than it probably should have. "I'll continue," she said. "That would be inadvisable," the medical drone interjected, its voice synthesized and genderless. "Your stress markers indicate—" "I'll continue," Joanna repeated, putting more force behind it this time. Vesh made a gesture that might have been a shrug or might have been something else entirely. "Very well. You have 8 minutes remaining in your recovery period." The proctor moved away, returning to her observation platform. Joanna lay still, focusing on breathing, on convincing her body that the worst was over. It was a lie. Stage 4 would be at 2.4 Gs, a level where human biology started to make uncomfortable compromises. But it was a necessary lie. She used the remaining time to watch the other cadets still moving through Stage 3. Throks was finishing what looked like a combat simulation, his movements precise despite the crushing gravity. Silvestri was doing something impossible on a balance course, her body phases slightly out of sync with normal spacetime. Joanna made a mental note to ask about that later, if there was a later. And Thomas. Thomas was carrying another load, this one even heavier than the last, and his face was doing that thing faces did right before their owners collapsed. But he wasn't stopping. Step after grinding step, he moved forward, and Joanna found herself silently urging him on the same way she imagined he'd done for her when she was on the sprint course. He made it, barely, dropped his load exactly at the finish marker, and went down hard. But he made it. The timer counted down. When it hit 0, Joanna stood up, ignoring the medical drone's protests, ignoring the way her left knee wanted to buckle, ignoring every signal her body was sending that screamed, this was a terrible idea. She walked, slowly, carefully, to the staging area for Stage 4. Stage 4 began at 2.4 standard gravities, and the moment it activated, Joanna understood viscerally why the survival rate for humans in this program was so low. This wasn't heavy anymore. It was crushing. Her heart struggled to pump blood upward against the pull. Her lungs worked twice as hard for half the oxygen. Even standing still felt like an act of defiance against physics. The challenge for this stage was deceptively simple. Traverse a 50-meter course with obstacles designed to test balance, strength, and coordination. The same kind of thing they'd been doing all along, just with an extra percentage of their body weight trying to drag them into the floor. Joanna looked at the course and did the math one more time. At 2.4 Gs, she was effectively carrying an extra 73 kilograms. She massed 125 kilograms total in this environment, a heavyweight human male. The problem was that her skeleton and musculature were built for a 52-kilogram frame. Something was going to break. The only question was whether it would break before or after she finished. The first obstacle was a simple barrier wall, 3 meters high. At Earth gravity, she could have scaled it with a running start and some upper body strength. Here, getting her feet off the ground felt like trying to launch a satellite with rubber bands. She studied the wall, looking for anything she could use. There, a slight imperfection in the surface, a seam where 2 panels met. Not quite a handhold, but close enough. And there, a support strut on the left side that might take her weight. She approached at an angle, using momentum she didn't have to spare, hit the wall with her right foot at the exact spot where the seam would give her a millimeter of extra purchase, grabbed the support strut with both hands, and hauled herself up through sheer stubborn refusal to fall. At the top, she paused for breath she didn't have time to take, then dropped down the other side. The landing sent shock waves through her already compromised knee, but it held. Next obstacle, a suspension bridge made of individual platforms that moved independently. At normal gravity, this would be about timing and rhythm. Here, each platform sank under her weight, forcing her to adjust mid-step, finding balance on surfaces that didn't want to cooperate. She was 3 platforms in when she saw Thomas fall. He'd been on a different obstacle course. They'd been split up for this stage, each cadet facing their own path, and she caught the motion in her peripheral vision. One moment he was there, fighting through what looked like a crawl tunnel under some kind of weighted net. The next, he was on the ground, not moving. Medical drones swarmed immediately. Joanna forced herself to look away, to focus on her own platforms. She couldn't help him, could barely help herself. That was the brutal arithmetic of this test. She finished the suspension bridge and faced the next challenge, a set of hanging rings. each one positioned just slightly too far apart for her reach. This was designed for species with longer arms, and at normal gravity, she might have been able to make it work with momentum and timing. At 2.4 Gs, reaching for those rings was going to be like trying to swing a wrecking ball. Joanna grabbed the first ring and immediately felt her shoulder socket scream protest. The gravity wanted to tear her arm out of its joint, wanted to drag her straight down. She held on, got her other hand on the ring, and started swinging. Building momentum at this gravity was nearly impossible. Each swing felt like moving through concrete, but she'd learned a long time ago that impossible just meant nobody had figured out the right technique yet. She swung 3 times, 4 times, building amplitude through careful timing rather than brute force. On the 5th swing, she released and fell, really, with just enough forward vector, toward the second ring. She caught it one-handed, felt something in her elbow pop, wrapped her other hand around before gravity could finish its work. Now she was hanging by 2 hands again, and the pain in her shoulder was no longer screaming. It was just a constant white noise of wrong that she filed away under problems for later. 3 more rings. She made the second transition better than the first, catching with both hands, her body starting to understand the rhythm even as it fell apart. The third transition was worse. She missed her grip, caught the ring with just her fingertips, had to do a pull-up that cost her the last of her upper body strength just to secure her hold. 2 rings left. Her hands were bleeding now. She could feel the moisture, see the dark smears on the metal. The gravity was pulling the blood downward, making each drip feel like losing part of herself to the floor below. 4th ring. She barely made it, her body moving on autopilot, running on whatever reserves humans accessed when the alternative was failure. Some primitive part of her brain that didn't understand quitting, didn't care about damaged tissue or reasonable limits. Last ring, final transition. Her hands were numb, which was probably a mercy. She swung once, twice, couldn't build the momentum she needed, swung a 3rd time anyway, and let go. For a moment she was weightless, gravity's pull canceled by her forward motion. Then both forces reasserted themselves simultaneously, and she dropped like a stone. She caught the last ring. Barely. 1 hand, and she felt the joint in her ring finger dislocate with a sensation like a firecracker going off. But she caught it, got her other hand up, and held on. The far platform was 2 meters away. At normal gravity, she could have swung and released, landed cleanly. Here, she'd probably break both ankles on the landing. So instead, she pulled herself up, using arm strength she'd exhausted 3 obstacles ago, until she could hook a knee over the ring, then use that leverage to flip herself forward and onto the platform. She landed on her hands and knees, breathing in gasps, bleeding on the floor. Somewhere in the distance, an alert chimed. Stage 4 complete. Joanna tried to stand, and couldn't. Her legs weren't accepting commands anymore. She knelt there, world narrowing to the immediate experience of being a biological system in cascading failure, and tried to remember why she'd thought this was a good idea. Then hands were on her again, careful but insistent, and she was being moved to another recovery area. This time, the medical protocols were more aggressive. She felt the cold pressure of auto-injectors against her neck, her thighs. Analgesics, probably. Maybe something to keep her heart from giving up entirely. The pain receded slightly, replaced by a cottony distance that wasn't quite numbness, but was close enough. She could think again, which might have been a mistake. Cadet Reeves. Vesh's voice. Joanna forced her eyes open and found the Draken Proctor standing over her, her expression still unreadable, but maybe with a slight shift towards something that wasn't quite concern, but was in the same neighborhood. "How many left?" Joanna asked. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "Of your pod, 3. Yourself, Cadet Throaks, and Cadet Silvestri. Cadet Wright collapsed during Stage 4 and has been withdrawn from the evaluation for medical reasons. Of the full cohort, 21 cadets remain active. Is Thomas—" She couldn't finish the question. "Cadet Wright will recover. His injuries are not permanent. That was something at least. Joanna tried to process the other numbers. 21 from 200, just over 10%, and she was still in it. Stage 5 is at 2.7 standard gravities, Vesh continued, her voice carrying that clinical detachment that probably meant she'd watched hundreds of cadets break themselves on this test. Medical evaluation indicates you have sustained significant tissue damage, joint trauma, and metabolic stress. You are cleared to continue, but the probability of permanent injury increases substantially. "What's the challenge?" Joanna asked, instead of responding to the warning. Vesh's scaled head tilted slightly. A direct vertical climb of 15 meters, followed by a controlled descent. Most species capable of reaching stage 5 find it manageable. For humans, she paused. In 30 years, 4 humans have reached stage 5. None have completed it. There's always a first time. Indeed. Something flickered in Vesh's eyes. Respect, maybe, or possibly just clinical curiosity about how long Joanna would last. You have 12 minutes remaining in your recovery period. The proctor moved away, and Joanna lay still, staring up at the ceiling panels that curved somewhere impossibly high above. 2.7 Gs. That would put her effective mass at 140 kilograms, nearly 3 times her actual body weight. At that level, human bodies started making very bad decisions, blood pooling in extremities, consciousness flickering like a dying bulb, organs struggling to function properly. She should stop. Knew she should stop. Thomas had stopped, or rather, his body had made the decision for him, and he'd been bigger, stronger, better prepared than she was. There was no shame in reaching stage 4. That was already farther than most humans ever got. But she could see Throks across the hall, resting between stages, his massive frame looking barely winded, could see Silvestri doing something that looked like meditation, her body shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. They were going to stage 5, and if they could do it, if their bodies could tolerate those conditions, then maybe... She cut off that line of thinking. It wasn't about what their bodies could do. It was about what hers could do. And right now, her body was a collection of compromised systems held together by medical intervention and stubborn pride. The auto-injectors had done their work. The pain was still there, but muted, manageable. She could feel her heart rate stabilizing, breath coming easier. Whatever they'd given her was buying time, that was all. It wouldn't prevent further damage. It would just mask the warnings until the damage became catastrophic. Joanna sat up slowly, testing each joint, each muscle group. Her left knee was probably bone on bone at this point, the cartilage ground away. Her right shoulder had limited range of motion, the rotator cuff torn or badly strained. The dislocated finger on her left hand had been reset by the medical drone, but it throbbed with each heartbeat. She stood up. The medical drone made an alarmed beep and extended several manipulator arms as if to catch her when she fell. She didn't fall. Swayed, maybe. Took a moment to find her center of gravity, but she didn't fall. "I'm continuing," she said to the drone, to Vesh, to anyone who was listening. She walked to the staging area for stage 5. Each step was careful, measured, placing her feet with the precision of someone navigating a minefield. Because that's what her body was now, a minefield of injuries waiting to detonate into something catastrophic. The staging area was nearly empty. Just 3 cadets, Throks, Silvestri, and now Joanna. The Kraven looked at her with his cluster of black eyes, mandibles clicking in what she'd learned to recognize as surprise. "Human Reeves," he rumbled, "you are still active. Apparently. This is..." He paused, searching for words. "Unexpected." Silvestri drifted closer, her movements still somehow fluid, even in the heavy gravity. "Your species' physiology should have collapsed 3 stages ago. How are you still functional?" "Spite, mostly," Joanna said, and was surprised to hear herself laugh. It came out as more of a wheeze, but still. "Also, I'm probably not going to be functional much longer, so don't get too impressed. The climb will be difficult for you, Throke said. It wasn't mockery, just statement of fact. Your reach is insufficient for the holds, and your mass-to-strength ratio is suboptimal. I noticed. The staging area began to glow, gravity ramping up with the smooth inevitability of tide. Joanna felt it like a physical blow, her knees buckling, catching herself just before she went down. The world grayed at the edges, her heart hammering frantically as it tried to push blood upward against the increased pull. 2.7 Gs, 140 kilograms of effective mass pressing down on a frame built for 52. The vertical climb revealed itself, a wall that stretched up 15 meters, holds placed with deliberate cruelty, each one requiring full extension to reach. For Throaks, it would be challenging, but doable. For Silvestri, she'd probably use whatever physics-bending trick she'd been employing all day. For Joanna, it looked like a death sentence. She approached the wall, studying it from ground level, because lifting her head back to look up made her vision sparkle. The holds were color-coded, green for starting positions, yellow for intermediate, red for advanced. The route markers suggested a path that zigzagged up the wall, using specific holds in sequence. That route was designed for species with 2-meter arm spans. Joanna would have to find her own path. She grabbed the first green hold, simple, large, right at chest height, and pulled. The movement that should have been trivial took everything she had. She got her right foot on a lower hold, pushed, felt her knee scream protest, but hold. Left foot up, right hand reaching for the next hold, fingers closing around it. She was 1 meter off the ground, and already her arms were shaking. Don't think about the 14 meters ahead. Think about the next hold, just the next hold. She reached, stretched, felt her shoulder joint grinding in its socket, caught the hold, pulled. Her feet scrabbled for purchase, found it. 2 meters up. Beside her, much higher up, because they'd started earlier, Throaks was climbing with methodical precision, his 4 arms giving him options she couldn't imagine. Above him, Silvestri seemed to be flowing up the wall like water, her body phasing slightly with each movement in ways that made Joanna's eyes hurt. 3 meters. 4 meters. Joanna's world had narrowed to hold-reach-pull step, a rhythm that was the only thing keeping her from falling. Her hands were bleeding again, leaving dark smears on each hold. The medical drone was probably having a fit, but she couldn't hear its protests over the sound of her own breathing. 5 meters. Her right hand slipped. For a heart-stopping moment she hung by her left hand, feet losing contact with the wall, body swinging outward. The gravity pulled at her like a malevolent entity, trying to tear her away. Her left shoulder socket screamed, something tearing that shouldn't tear. She swung back, got her feet on holds, her right hand back on the wall. Hung there for 5 seconds, 10, breathing through the white-hot pain. Don't look down. Don't look up. Just look at the next hold. 6 meters. 7. This was where her preparation had left her, in a place beyond technique, beyond strategy, beyond anything except the bare animal will to continue existing in defiance of every signal her body was sending. She wasn't climbing anymore. She was surviving, second by second, 1 hold at a time. 8 meters, halfway. She made the mistake of looking up and saw how far she still had to go. The summit seemed impossibly distant, shimmering in her darkening vision. Throaks had reached the top already, his silhouette visible against the distant ceiling. Silvestri was close behind him, and Joanna was here, 8 meters up, with her body sending increasingly urgent messages that system failure was imminent. She reached for the next hold, and her left hand wouldn't close properly. The fingers weren't responding to commands, nerves damaged or just exhausted beyond function. She tried again, managed to hook her hand around the hold even though she couldn't feel it, couldn't trust it. 9 meters. Her vision was tunneling badly now, the edges going dark and staying that way. She could feel her heart beating arrhythmically, struggling to maintain function under conditions it was never designed for. Her lungs were working in gasps that didn't seem to bring oxygen. 10 meters. Something in her left knee finally gave up entirely. Not a catastrophic failure, more like a resignation. The joint just stopped providing support, started acting like a hinge without tension. She adjusted her weight to the right leg, kept climbing. 11 meters. She was going to make it or die trying, and at this point, those seemed like equally acceptable outcomes. The world had simplified to just this. Up, just up. Nothing else mattered. Not the pain, not the damage, not the reasonable voice in her head that was screaming for her to stop. 12 meters. Her right hand reached for the next hold and couldn't find it. She patted the wall blindly, vision too far gone to see properly, looking for the purchase she needed. Found it. Pulled. Felt something else tear in her shoulder, but she was beyond caring about new injuries. 13 meters. Time had become negotiable. She existed in a continuous present where each moment was exactly the same. Reach, pull, step, survive, repeating until it either ended in success or failure, but either way, it would end, and that was enough. 14 meters. One more. Just one more meter. She could see the edge of the platform above her, see the space where wall became ceiling. So close. Close enough that if she fell now, it would be particularly cruel. She reached up with her right hand. Her left was completely non-functional now, and grabbed the final hold, used every remaining trace of strength to pull herself up, got her right foot on what might have been a hold or might have been a seam, pushed with her one good leg, and hauled herself over the edge. Joanna lay on the top platform for a time that might have been seconds or minutes, breathing in gasps that rattled in her chest, her body a symphony of system failures, all reporting in at once. The medical drone had followed her up somehow, probably flying. She wasn't thinking clearly enough to figure out the specifics, and was hovering above her, scanners sweeping in patterns that painted concern across her closed eyelids. Immediate medical intervention required. Cardiac arrhythmia, multiple structural failures. The drone's voice washed over her like background noise. More interesting was the pressure against her back, the solid surface that meant she'd made it. She'd actually made it to the top. 15 meters of vertical climb in 2.7 times Earth gravity, with a body that had been falling apart since stage 2. Cadet Reeves. She forced her eyes open and found Proctor Vesh standing over her, the Draken's expression cycling through something complex that Joanna's oxygen-starved brain couldn't quite parse. Beside her, Throx loomed like a monument, his mandibles spread wide in what might have been shock. "You completed the climb," Vesh said, her voice pitched carefully neutral. "You are the first human to do so." "Great," Joanna managed. "Do I get a medal, or just permanent disability?" "The controlled descent remains. Are you capable of continuing?" Joanna tried to sit up, and her body vetoed the suggestion immediately. She managed to prop herself up on one elbow, the right one, the left arm was done, and looked at the descent apparatus. It was a rope system, simple enough in concept. Controlled rappel down the 15 meters she'd just climbed. At normal gravity, trivial. Here, with her mass effectively tripled and her grip strength approximately 0, it looked like an excellent way to accelerate the dying process. "How does the descent work?" she asked, buying time while her heart tried to remember its proper rhythm. "You clip into the safety harness," Vesh explained, gesturing to the equipment. "The descent is controlled by your grip on the brake line. Release slowly for controlled descent. Hold firm to stop. The system cannot fail. It is designed for cadet safety. Define cannot fail. If you lose consciousness or lose your grip, the system auto-locks. You will not fall. However, you must maintain sufficient control to complete the descent within the time parameters." Vesh paused. "You have sustained significant damage to your upper extremities. Do you retain sufficient grip strength?" Joanna looked at her hands. The right one was still mostly functional, though the skin was torn and bleeding. The left one was swollen, 3 fingers at odd angles, and when she tried to flex it, nothing much happened. "I'll manage," she lied. Throats made a sound like grinding boulders. "Human Reeves, you have proven your point. You have exceeded all expectations. There is no dishonor in stopping now." "Is this concern I'm hearing?" Joanna asked, managing something that might have been a smile. "Didn't you spend all morning telling me I should quit?" "That was before." His mandibles clicked rapidly. "Before you demonstrated capabilities that I did not believe possible for your species. You have earned respect. You do not need to earn death." Silvestri drifted closer, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing in rhythms that Joanna was starting to understand meant agitation. "The Kraven speaks truth. Your body is in cascading failure. The readings are visible even to those of us without medical training. To continue is not bravery, it is self-destruction." "Maybe," Joanna admitted. She used her right arm to drag herself to sitting position, worlds spinning around her but settling eventually. "But I didn't come 9 light years to stop at 95%. She crawled. There was no dignity left to preserve, so why pretend? To the descent apparatus. The safety harness was designed for larger bodies, but the medical drone helped her adjust it, its manipulator arms surprisingly gentle as they secured the straps around her torso and thighs. The brake line ran through a belay device at her chest, the rope extending down into the distance below. "The descent begins when you step off the platform," Vesh said. "You must maintain control throughout. Touch the ground within acceptable parameters, and stage 5 is complete." "What are the acceptable parameters?" "You must descend at a controlled rate and arrive conscious. Low bar. For you, perhaps higher than you think." Joanna clipped in, tested the system with a tentative pull on the brake line. The rope held firm, the belay device responding to her grip. With her right hand, she could manage it. Probably. The left hand was useless, but she could loop the rope around her right forearm for backup. She positioned herself at the edge of the platform and looked down. Mistake. At 2.7 Gs, vertigo was not her friend. The ground seemed simultaneously too close and impossibly far away, perspective warped by the crushing gravity. She could see other cadets down there, the ones who'd dropped out in earlier stages, the ones who'd made reasonable decisions about their body's limits. Thomas was down there somewhere, hopefully being treated. She wondered if he was watching, if he was horrified or impressed or both. "Whenever you are ready, Cadet Reeves," Vesh said. Joanna stepped off the platform. The rope system caught her immediately, the belay device taking her weight, but the sudden transition from supported to suspended sent shock waves through her damaged body. Her right hand clenched on the brake line reflexively, stopping her descent after barely a meter. She hung there, spinning slightly, the harness digging into her hips and chest. Don't look down again. Focus on the brake line. Release slowly. She eased her grip fractionally and felt herself descend a few centimeters. Good. That worked. She could do this. Just 15 meters of controlled descent with one functional hand while carrying 140 effective kilograms. She descended another meter, then another, finding a rhythm. The brake line was rough against her palm, friction heat building, but her hands were too damaged to feel it properly. That was probably a mercy. 5 meters down, 10 meters to go. Her right hand was starting to cramp, the muscles in her forearm quivering with fatigue. She'd been gripping the brake line with desperate strength, every instinct screaming not to fall, even though the system was designed to prevent that. She forced herself to ease the grip slightly, to trust the equipment. 7 meters down, the cramping in her hand intensified, becoming a full-body spasm that ran up her arm and into her shoulder. Her fingers started to uncurl involuntarily, grip failing. She slipped 2 meters in a rush before the autolock engaged, jerking her to a stop so hard she bit her tongue, tasted blood. The medical drone chirped alarm as it followed her down, its scanners probably painting a very concerning picture. Joanna hung there, breathing through the panic, waiting for her hand to remember how to function. The autolock had saved her, but she'd have to disengage it manually to continue, and that meant trusting her grip strength again. She flexed her right hand experimentally. The fingers responded, barely. The cramping had eased slightly with the forced pause. She reached up to the auto-lock mechanism and triggered the release. The descent resumed, slower now, more careful. She was hyper-aware of every point of contact, rope against palm, harness around torso, the constant pull of gravity trying to accelerate her downward. 8 meters down, 7 meters to go. Her vision was tunneling again, consciousness flickering at the edges. The gravity was winning, pulling blood away from her brain, and all the medical intervention in the world couldn't change basic physics forever. She had maybe 2 minutes of consciousness left, maybe less. 9 meters down, 6 to go. She could hear voices from below now, cadets watching the descent, probably placing bets on whether she'd make it. She couldn't make out words, just the murmur of multiple species and languages blending together. Somewhere in that crowd, Thomas was watching, probably cursing her stubborn stupidity. 10 meters down, 5 to go. Her hand opened involuntarily again, but this time she was ready for it. She caught herself on the backup loop around her forearm, felt the rope bite into her skin, but held. The auto-lock engaged again, stopping her fall, but she'd lost another 1.5 meters, 3.5 meters to go. She could see individuals now, saw Throks at the front of the crowd, his mandibles spread wide, saw other cadets from pods she didn't know, saw training staff with their data pads and medical equipment ready. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting to see if the impossible little human would finish what she'd started. She released the auto-lock and descended. 2 meters to go. She could almost reach the ground if she stretched, if she just let go and dropped. But the parameters required control, required consciousness. She had to finish this properly, or it wouldn't count. 1 meter to go. Her right hand was completely numb now, fingers frozen in a claw around the brake line. Her vision had narrowed to a tunnel barely wide enough to see the ground approaching. Her heart was doing something arrhythmic and wrong that the medical drone was extremely upset about. 0.5 meter. She touched ground with her right foot, felt solid surface beneath her boot, and her leg collapsed immediately. She went down hard, the harness catching her, holding her semi-upright even as her body gave up pretending it could support itself. An alert chimed. Stage 5 complete. The last thing Joanna saw before consciousness finally negotiated its exit was Throks's face, mandibles clicking in what looked like astonishment, and behind him the gathered crowd of cadets from a dozen species, all of them staring at the human who'd just done what humans weren't supposed to be able to do. Then the darkness came up to meet her, and she gratefully let it have her. Joanna woke in medical, which was unsurprising. What was surprising was that she woke at all. The ceiling above her was a soft blue-white that suggested advanced medical facilities rather than the harsh lighting of emergency triage. She was in a regeneration pod. She could feel the faint tingle of accelerated healing across her skin, the slightly wrong sensation of tissue being rebuilt at unnatural speeds. She tried to sit up and discovered that while consciousness had returned, voluntary muscle control was still being negotiated. Her body politely informed her that movement was going to be very difficult for the immediate future. "Please remain still," a synthesized voice said. The medical drone from the evaluation appeared above her, its sensors blinking in patterns she'd learned meant it was both monitoring and judging her. "You have sustained extensive damage to multiple systems. Full mobility will return in approximately 6 hours. "How long was I out?" 48 hours. Your injuries required intensive regeneration protocols. 2 days. She'd been unconscious for 2 entire days. Joanna processed that information slowly, her thoughts still moving through molasses. 2 days meant the first evaluation was long over, meant everyone had been sorted into their permanent training pods, meant she'd either passed or failed, and either way, decisions had been made without her. "Did I pass?" she asked the drone. "That information must come from your proctor. Proctor Vesh has been notified of your consciousness and is en route. So she'd have to wait. Joanna stared at the ceiling and took inventory of her body. Everything hurt, but it was the dull ache of healing rather than acute damage. Her hands were wrapped in regeneration fields that glowed faintly green. Her left knee was immobilized in some kind of brace. Her shoulder felt wrong but functional. She'd done permanent damage. She knew that with the certainty that came from pushing biology past its breaking point. The regeneration tech could fix a lot, but it couldn't turn back time, couldn't undo the deep structural compromises she'd forced on her frame. She'd be healing from this evaluation for months, maybe longer. The question was whether it had been worth it. Footsteps approaching, multiple sets, different rhythms. Joanna turned her head slightly and saw Proctor Vesh entering, followed by two figures that made her breath catch, Throks and Thomas. Throks looked the same as always, massive and rust-colored and impossible to read. Thomas looked like he'd been through his own medical intervention. His arm was braced, and he moved with the careful gait of someone relearning their center of gravity. "Cadet Reeves," Vesh said, her voice pitched to that almost gentle frequency she'd used in the recovery areas. "You are awake. This is favorable. Medical was uncertain about the timeline for your consciousness return." "Was it that bad?" "You achieved what medical staff are calling cascading multi-system failure, which is apparently rare enough to be interesting from a research perspective." Vesh tilted her head. "You also completed Stage 5, making you the first human in the Academy's history to do so. These facts are related." "So I passed?" "Yes, you passed." Vesh pulled up a holographic display, data streaming across it in patterns Joanna couldn't quite follow. "Your overall performance score placed you in the 73rd percentile of all cadets who completed the evaluation. Of Pod 17, you ranked 3rd behind Cadet Throks and Cadet Silvestri. 3rd, out of a pod of 8, with 5 dropping out at various stages." Joanna tried to feel disappointed and couldn't quite manage it. She'd known going in that she wouldn't top the rankings. The goal had never been to be the best, just to prove she could survive. "Pod assignments have been finalized," Vesh continued. "Pod 17 remains intact with its 4 successful members, Cadet Throks, Cadet Silvestri, Cadet Reeves, and Cadet Wright. The 4 who did not complete the evaluation have been reassigned to other training tracks." Joanna looked at Thomas, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You passed?" "Made it through Stage 4 before my body called a vote and decided to shut down," he said. His voice carried something complicated, pride mixed with something else. Frustration, maybe. "They had me in regeneration for 30 hours. Woke up yesterday and found out they'd been running a betting pool on whether you'd survive." "What were the odds?" 60-40 you wouldn't make it." He moved closer to the regeneration pod, limping slightly. "I won 200 credits betting on you. Figured anyone crazy enough to keep going after watching me collapse probably had some kind of death wish keeping her functional." "Sound investment strategy." Throks's mandibles clicked. That rapid pattern that Joanna had learned meant agitation or strong emotion. "Human Reeves, I must apologize." That got her attention. She'd never heard a Kraven apologize for anything. "For what?" "I underestimated your capabilities. I believed you would fail. I told you that you would fail." His cluster of eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. "I was wrong. You completed challenges that I believed impossible for your species. You demonstrated strength that does not appear in any physiological database. He paused, mandibles working like he was chewing the words. "You have earned respect, and I failed to give it when I should have." The sincerity in his voice was almost worse than the earlier dismissal. Joanna didn't know how to respond to Throks being impressed. She'd spent so much time pushing back against his low expectations that his actual respect felt disorienting. "You weren't wrong about my capabilities," she said carefully. "Look at me. I'm in a regeneration pod because I pushed myself into system failure. You were right that I wasn't strong enough for the test. No. Throaks leaned closer, and Joanna fought the instinct to flinch away from all that mass and sharp edges. I was right about your physical strength. I was wrong about your strength. There is a difference. You completed stage 5 not because your body could tolerate those conditions, but because your will would not accept failure. I have fought beside Kraven warriors for 3 years before coming here. I have seen beings who can crush metal with their hands collapse under conditions you survived. Strength is not only muscle. Vesh made a sound that might have been approval. The Kraven speaks truth. Your performance has prompted considerable discussion among the training staff. Human physiology should have forced your withdrawal no later than stage 3. The fact that you continued to stage 5, that you completed stage 5, suggests variables we have not adequately accounted for in our assessment of your species' capabilities. I just didn't want to quit, Joanna said, uncomfortable with the analysis. That's not some special human trait. That's just stubbornness. Perhaps, Vesh said, or perhaps your species' documented history of accomplishing things that should be impossible through sheer determination is more significant than we have credited. This evaluation has caused the training staff to revisit our assumptions about human limitations. Thomas laughed, a short bark of sound. They're going to make the tests harder for future humans, aren't they? Because you couldn't just fail like a normal person. Probably, Joanna admitted. Sorry about that. Don't be. He shook his head, still smiling. You gave me something to aim for. Next year's evaluation, I'm getting to stage 5. You've made it a pride thing now. Next year, didn't finish the current evaluation, so I get to try again in 6 months. Academy rules. He didn't sound particularly bothered by this. Gives me time to train specifically for the higher gravity stages. Maybe get some gene therapy to increase my bone density. That is permitted? Throaks asked, sounding interested. Within limits. Can't change fundamental physiology, but we can optimize what we've got. Thomas glanced at Joanna. You should consider it too. Your performance was incredible, but you basically destroyed yourself in the process. Some strategic enhancements could help you maintain that level without the cascading failure part. I'll think about it, Joanna said, though she wasn't sure she would. There was something about accepting genetic modification that felt like admitting her natural body wasn't good enough. Though given that her natural body had just spent 2 days in intensive regeneration, maybe that ship had sailed. Vesh pulled up another display, this one showing what looked like a training schedule. Pod 17, your formal training begins in 5 days. Cadet Reeves, you will remain in medical until your mobility is fully restored. The regeneration protocols are accelerated, but your injuries were extensive. Expect full recovery in 4 days. And then you begin learning how to be a naval officer rather than a survivor of gravity torture. Vesh's expression shifted into what might have been amusement. The evaluation was designed to test limits. The actual training is designed to expand them. What you accomplished in the evaluation will be expected as baseline performance going forward. Joanna absorbed that. The crushing gravity, the impossible challenges, the pushing herself to system failure, that was just the entry requirement. The actual program would be worse. Looking forward to it, she said, and found she meant it. Yes, everything hurt. Yes, she'd probably taken years off her life expectancy, but she'd done what they said she couldn't do, had made it farther than any human before her, and now she got to see how much farther she could push that boundary. Throx's mandibles clicked in what was definitely approval this time. This is good. Pod 17 has proven strong. We will be stronger together. Touching sentiment from someone who wanted me to quit yesterday, Joanna said, but there was no heat in it. That was before I understood what humans are capable of. He straightened to his full, imposing height. Now I know, and I look forward to seeing what else you will teach us. After they left, Throks moving with his usual grace, Thomas limping but determined, Vesh gliding away with her datapads, Joanna lay in the regeneration pod and stared at the ceiling. Her body was healing, tissue rebuilding, the damage slowly being erased. In 4 days, she'd be released. In 5 days, she'd begin training that would probably break her all over again. And somewhere in that thought, she found herself smiling. She'd come to the academy to prove something, to herself, to her species, to everyone who'd looked at her and seen limitations rather than possibilities. The evaluation had been just the first step, a brutal, crushing, nearly fatal first step, but still just the beginning. The ceiling above her cycled through soft colors, part of the regeneration protocol's psychological component, blues and greens meant to soothe, to encourage healing. Joanna watched the patterns shift and thought about what came next. Stage 5 had been impossible until she did it. The training ahead would probably feel the same way, impossible right up until the moment it wasn't. And if she could survive gravity that tried to crush her into the deck, she could probably survive whatever else the Academy had planned. She closed her eyes and let the regeneration pod do its work, her body knitting itself back together molecule by molecule, preparing for the next impossible thing. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of the Academy continuing, cadets training, instructors teaching, the massive station humming with purpose. She was part of that now, not the weakest link, not the human who couldn't keep up, just another cadet who'd proven she belonged. The smallest cadet, yes, but also the one who'd walked through conditions that bent physics and kept walking anyway, and that had to count for something. 4 days later, Joanna walked out of medical on her own 2 feet, limping slightly, moving carefully, but walking. Thomas was waiting outside, probably because Throks had told him to be there, probably because pod members were supposed to look out for each other. "Ready to start actual training?" he asked, falling into step beside her as they headed toward the training complex. Joanna thought about the gravity chambers ahead, the combat simulations, the 1,000 ways the Academy would try to break her. Thought about the fact that she'd already broken and been rebuilt, and could probably do it again if necessary. "Absolutely," she said, and meant it completely. They walked together toward whatever came next, 2 humans in a galaxy that was just learning what that meant, and somewhere behind them, Joanna could have sworn she heard Throks' mandibles clicking in approval.